there are lots of people who look at the impact of Christianity clearly on Western civilization as being at its root, but people are making the argument that we have become like fish in water. We don't really recognize that we are surrounded by Christian assumptions and ideals. And Tom Holland, quite famously in his book Dominion, The Making of the Western Mind, where he talked about how Christianity created our moral structure and the way that we see the world, argues that almost everything that has come out of particularly the Reformation, all of the ideological strains like feminism, for example, he argues even the idea of wokeism in the end. But these are not possible with any other lineage, like ideological genealogical lineage than Christianity. So feminism came on the scene, and as you have said, is that there is an assumption within it, at least within strains of it, that actually it's trying to raise women above men. How would you describe the changing face of feminism, and what are the other core assumptions that we've come to live by, particularly in the Anglosphere, with the rise of feminism?
Yeah, it's okay. So we had a women's movement before we had feminism as such. You can argue back and forth. Forms of feminism are actually relatively old. They go back to the 19th century. But it's not clear to me that many suffragettes would describe themselves as feminists, for example. Perhaps they would, perhaps they wouldn't. That's not clear to me that they would. And feminism really came on strong in the 20th century, when, of course, the push for women's suffrage and a more equal treatment of women in law, goes back to the 19th century. For example, the Married Women's Property Act. So what's happened is there's a long, what I call the emancipation sequence in Western society. So abolish the slave trade, abolish slavery, Jewish emancipation, Catholic emancipation, adult male suffrage, adult female suffrage, gay liberation, women's liberation. There's this sequence of movements to incorporate more and more people in the political order and the equal legal order. So this is obviously something going on. This is deeply Christian in its roots, right? We're all, children of God. We're all equal before God. More or less every political philosophy in the West is some sort of Christian heresy or some sort of Christian derivative. The one that is most clearly not is Nazism. And that's why, as Tom Holland has pointed out, Hitler is a secular Satan. And it's why people regularly say Nazism's worse than communism, even though communism's got way more people. It's Nazism seen as worse because it's much more viscerally a denial of those underlying Christian assumptions. Now, Hitler, because he was operating in a country that was mostly Christian, in public was not all that direct about that all the time, but it's very clear that his underlying logic was deeply, deeply, deeply anti-Christian. And in fact, in his table talk, he waxes lyrical about how Islam's much better because it's a good warrior religion. So you get these very strains going on, but what makes feminism really striking in this sequence is it's the one that decides it needs its own philosophy. It needs its own view of the world, right? So when people said, we've got to abolish slavery, they didn't need a special ideology for slavery. When Jewish emancipation came, you didn't need a special ideology for the Jews. When Catholic emancipation came, you didn't need a special ideology for Catholics, right? It was just about joining, right? And take Martin Luther King, right? A man who in his thinking is Christian to his boot heels. If you read any of his stuff, he's a Christian all the way down. What did he appeal to? He appealed to two things. He appealed to Christian regard for the other and love thy neighbor and that. But he also appealed to the ideals of the American Revolution and the American War of Independence. So he's not saying we need a special system for African Americans. He was saying you have these two things. which demand that we be included, that we be added in, right? Feminism, the first one that comes along and says, yeah, no, we need our own special philosophy for it. And it's really quite striking that you have this difference. It's not merely we want in, but we need this special ideology. And I think one of the reasons for this is it's the first one that has to actually deal with biological differences. We're a sexually reproducing species, right? There are differences in our role in society because we're male and female. And a lot of feminism was very uncomfortable with the idea that men and women are cognitively different, because the fear was that if you admitted that, it would get in the way of women getting access to everything. Obviously, a lot of the argument against it was, well, women are like this, so therefore we shouldn't let them in to all these areas. So an obvious move is, no, we're all the same. You had to sort of grapple, you had to make claims that were different from the sort of claims you had to say, because, all the other claims were basically, we're human. We're human, so we're allowed in, right? They didn't have to deal with, there were claims about biological differences, but they're all crap. But with women, you do actually have to deal with the fact that, they're physically weaker by and large, and they have different roles in reproduction. And despite claims to the contrary, we are actually cognitively dimorphic. I mean, there's a huge area of overlap, but there are some really distinct differences between the two. So they had to deal with biological differences in a way that the other let us in movements didn't. And so that's led all sorts of places.